So what exactly is Vuex? Vuex is a library for managing global state. Okay, that's a nice sentence. What does it mean? What's state? State could simply be translated with data. Data your application needs and data that affects what the user sees on the screen. So you can think of state as reactive data, data which may change and where such changes then should trigger something on the screen. And Vue.js is all about this reactivity, of course, as you learned throughout the course. But managing data, state, that affects different components of your app can be tricky. For that, it's important, though, to differentiate between two main kinds of state: local state and global state. Local state is the state, the data you manage inside of one component, which only affects this one component and possibly indirectly through props, also a child component. Here, examples could be user input that was entered into input elements, or for example, a button that shows or hides some container. And I got an example for you. This is a course project we built a little bit earlier in the course, after the main component sections. It's this learning resource manager. And in there, in the add_resource.vue file, in the add_resource component, we, for example, have a form where we fetch user input. And that user input, as well as the overall form validity, only matters to this component. Here, for example, we have this input is invalid data, and therefore that would be the state of that component, which influences whether or not we show this dialog. So this input is invalid data piece is state because it affects what the user sees on the screen. We show or don't show this dialog, and it really only matters to this component. We manage it internally in this component, so that would be an example for a local state. On the other hand, global state is state, data, that affects multiple components, possibly the entire app. So data which you need in a lot of different places. Examples here could be the user authentication status, whether a user is logged in or not, shopping cart items which might be presented in different parts of the app, and similar examples. Again, in this app I just showed you, an example for global state could be found in the resources view file. In there, I got these stored resources, and those stored resources are changed through the add_resource method, for example, but this method is triggered from inside another component, and the stored resources are also used in other components of this app. So this is an app-wide, or at least a multi-component state. It's data that's used across multiple components. And it's the global state where Vuex can help us. Because thus far, for example, in this app I just showed you, we managed this state through provide and inject. And this works, and this is not necessarily bad, but it has a couple of drawbacks which might or might not matter to you. One potential disadvantage, for example, is that you end up with all the data and all the methods to change the data in one component, in this case the resources component, which therefore gets rather big and which has a lot of data and a lot of methods inside of it, which isn't really needed for the template of that component, but which is simply needed in other components. So getting such a big component which manages cross-component state, that can be hard to maintain as your application grows and as you maybe have more and more global state to manage. In addition, provide and inject can have some tricky problems regarding reactivity. It depends on which data you provide and inject. And whilst there are solutions for all possible problems you could face, a solution like Vuex in the end might be the best solution. Now, why exactly is Vuex a good solution though? Why might it be worth a look? As I just outlined, managing app-wide or global state can be difficult. You end up with such fat components which have a lot of logic in them, which isn't needed for the component template, but in other components of the app. You also might have unpredictable behavior in your application because it's not always immediately obvious where state gets changed, or maybe it's possible to change state in ways that you don't want it to be changed. It also could be error prone because accidental or missed state updates could happen. Coming back to this example, in the component where we inject the resources, we get the resources array, which we also manage in the resources.view. Now, theoretically, we could edit this array in the place where it is injected, and we would be editing the exact same array in memory. We're not doing this here, but you could do it accidentally, or maybe because a colleague is working on the code who isn't paying close attention. And that is exactly what I mean with it being unpredictable or error prone. You can edit data in places where it shouldn't really be edited. Of course, if you're working on your own, this might not be a problem, but in bigger projects and in bigger teams, it could become a problem. And that's exactly where Vuex helps us, because with Vuex, we outsource the state management. It's no longer in such fat components. Instead, it's in a separate place detached from the components. It's also more predictable because Vuex has some clear rules on where state should be managed and how it should be updated and shared. And therefore, it's also less error prone because we have that clearly defined data flow, which we have to adhere. So that's the what and why. Now let's install Vuex and let's get started using it.